All right, so this is going to be a bit of a different type of video for me. We're sitting down with my friend Dan. He's owned his 392 Challenger for, I think it's 4 years now, and it's the most viewed video on the channel. The review of this car, much to his own personal pride, it's just performed the best. So I figured it would be fun to sit down with him again and just find out a little bit about his ownership experience, if he's had any issues, what are some of the things he likes about the car or doesn't. And I figured that might be interesting for anyone that's looking at buying one of these cars in the future. So let's get down to it.
Thanks, Conan. Love the show. Glad to be here.
So first and foremost, let's just get down to the details of the model. I know that you ordered this car specifically, so some of the packages that are on it, etc. Just give us the background.
So I got this car late 2017. It's a 2018 Dodge Challenger. When I was ordering it, there were certain things that were important to me as a new driver in terms of a manual car. So I got a wheel package for it. It's got 6-piston Brembo brakes, which were a really good decision. For my driving experience at the time, I kind of needed that stopping power to help me get used to the amount of horsepower that the car produced, be able to stop a little bit faster. That was very helpful. I also got a sound system in it. It's got the Avalanche 2. Get up again. Alpine 2. We're gonna redo that whole thing, dude. All right, so it's got the Alpine 2 sound system in it, which was a replacement in that year for the Harman Kardon setup that they actually had previously. Outside of that, I got the Alcantara seats, so a little bit nicer material. It comes cloth as a standard, so that's another package that I included as well. Outside of that, not too much, but surprisingly, it drove up the base cost of the car pretty significantly.
So off of that, was the 392 Scat Pack kind of like the happy middle ground for you between, say, like the 5.7 and the Hellcat?
Yeah, so it's got a 6.4 liter in it. The Hellcats run the 6.2 liter, which is supercharged. However, a lot better performance out of the Hellcats, but the difference is the 6.4 does not take the boost nearly as well as the 6.2. It's why Dodge made that decision for the Hellcat. However, for me, as not really a daily driver with this car, but just not having the amount of time to take it to a track or get the most use out of it on a regular basis, about 500 horsepower is more than enough than you need, as I'm sure you know. You're really not going to get all that a Hellcat can give you on a daily basis just driving around. So I think for me, it was probably the best decision.
Another one? Oh, I need my Tundra to be loud. Ooh. So why did you go with a Challenger versus, say, any of the other muscle cars or just any other car in general?
It's a pretty simple answer. It just looks the best in my opinion. The Challenger, when in comparison to the Mustang and the Camaro, probably still holds the most iconic look from that 60s and 70s era when the muscle cars kind of came out. It still looks true to its original predecessors, whereas the Mustang and Camaro, just some of the hard lines and sharp edges just don't really do it for me as much as this car. And having sat in a Mustang, in a Camaro, I will say that personally, the driving experience with the Challenger definitely feels the best and feels the most comfortable, especially in terms of viewing outside of the car and how much room you have to see out and around behind you when in the car yourself. But the most simplistic version of that answer is just the Challenger looks the best in my opinion. That's what I went for initially. I still think that holds up to this day after new models have been released.
Yeah, so certainly at this point in time, you could say that it's the one that's held truest to the original, not only design, but kind of ethos and philosophy of old school muscle cars,
right? Which
is cool.
Whereas Camaros and Mustangs have kind of adapted to a more well-balanced performance setup, I would say, similar to,
more of a sports car.
Right, more prepared for a track.
Yep. Okay, so there's people that would base entire videos off of these two questions alone, but what's your favorite thing about the car?
My favorite thing about the car is a surprising aspect that I didn't expect to encounter, which is actually how easy the vehicle is to drive. I came from a place where I was not experienced really much at all with driving a manual standard, whatever you want to call it, and the Challenger made it a very forgiving and easy experience for me to learn. I would say that this car is unforgiving at the top end of its performance. It can step away from you if you apply too much throttle and you don't know what you're doing. However, on the low end of it, it's got so much torque that it's extremely forgiving. It makes the driving experience very simple. Anyone that's trying to learn manual really just has to put the clutch back in to prevent a stall. It's not difficult whatsoever. And so for me, although an unexpected aspect of that car, it made it a very enjoyable and easygoing experience to get into driving the car itself.
So to go off of that a little bit, you actually learned to drive stick on this, right?
I had had some classes previously when I was younger, maybe like, I don't know, when I was 16, 17, coming through high school, but it had been about, I want to say 3 or 4 years before I had driven a manual of any sort. So I would essentially say that, yeah, the amount of time I spent driving this vehicle and getting back into it and kind of having to reteach myself, this would be my first owned and learned on manual car.
And so what's your least favorite thing about it?
My least favorite thing about the car is probably the fact that its gearing feels a little short. You've driven the car previously, you did a review video on it. I don't think you touched on this a ton back then, but you hadn't exactly had a ton of time with the vehicle. Right around 5,500 RPM is where it sounds and also feels like it's about to die off. I'm sure you can relate to that in some fashion, having driven it a few more times now since the review video.
Yeah, it feels like it just starts to not pull quite as hard, like right up close to redline. But then the gearing thing that bothered me a little bit was that right at redline, you shift into that next gear and it felt almost like it fell out of the power band a little bit,
right,
which is just kind of strange. I think it's really just geared for like long-legged highway kind of stuff, which is normal. I mean, it's a big, powerful muscle car. I think that's par for the course, but I would kind of like something that's a little bit like maybe closer ratio, like tighter gearing, rather than something that's so geared towards like highway.
I agree, and that would probably be my biggest complaint about driving it so far.
But the transmission itself, how do you like it?
Transmission itself actually feels fantastic. It's got a really knocky feel to it. Getting into gear is really satisfying. Sometimes you can even hear it just kind of knock itself into place, but you know, not in a bad, scary way, like there's something wrong with my car. It's just got that really old school classic feel to it, which is really good.
So has it been reliable? Have you had any problems with it? And like how many miles do you have it on it now?
Right now, there's about 35,000 miles on it. About a year ago, I had to use the car as a daily driver. I was in Alabama for about 2 years, and I used it there every day. I'd actually just totaled my commuter car right before going down to flight school, which was not ideal. But it became a daily driver, and it wasn't bad because I was in the South and weather was good. They don't salt or pre-treat the roads down there, so it was a good environment for the car to be on. Put a lot more miles on it than I had expected to in that time frame. However, the driving experience itself never really faltered. Everything seemed as if I had just gotten the car day one. I had no real performance issues throughout the entire experience having the vehicle down south. But what I did notice started to go on the car was all the parts and pieces of the interior. One of my biggest complaints so far is that I believe it was probably heat damage to the touchscreen on the center console, and you can start to see now there's some peeling and wearing away from the top. When you get in the car now, you turn the system on and the touchscreen just jumps around to 1,000,000 pages, making the radio and any of the performance pages just totally unusable. And it's about $630 just to replace. It's a steep venture. In addition to that, just other parts and pieces of the car. Nothing has started to really come off or anything yet, but just other cheaply made pieces where you can tell Dodge kind of cut some corners. And on the interior of the car, in my opinion, it's not bad, especially in consideration to other cars I've driven, but it certainly seems like it's more prone to wear over time. Like little dents and scratches can really make it not look so pretty.
Yeah, I think you can tell that like at this price point, even though you're paying $50, even sometimes $60,000 for one of these, you're paying for the performance and like the styling. Mm-hmm. The build quality, especially inside, is not where that money is really going. Right. They're making it nice enough and it's a pleasant place to be, but it's definitely not like the highlight of the car in the way that like a true like luxury car is.
The interior has a lot of that stock rental car feel. It doesn't feel too dissimilar on the inside from let's say a V6 Challenger.
Yeah, the seats, I think it's a good thing that you got those seats because that's what helps to kind of differentiate it a lot. So getting those nicer touch points, the wheel, the seats and stuff, I think really helps bring it to that higher level where you feel like you're getting a more expensive car. So I remember early on that you actually did have some engine issues with the car. Do you want to go into that a little bit?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I did. The vehicle at the time was only around 3,000 miles. I had not been driving it much. And you're a little bit better mechanically with understanding what goes on with engines, but I believe, if you can help me recall, a push rod had actually blown through the engine block. It was an immediate loss of power. I can't remember exactly what gear I was in at the time, maybe second or third, but it's just like everything died off and it came to a stall, but almost like a slow stall. Like the car didn't immediately shut off, it just slowly died out.
Wow. And so what exactly happened, like warranty-wise? Were you taken care of? Like what happened?
So the car was under warranty at the time. Being a new car, I hadn't bought a very extensive warranty package. It was 3 years or 75,000 miles or something to that effect. And so the engine was replaced, but these car manufacturers have lots of odd ends to their means when it comes to replacing big expensive parts of the vehicle. It's about a $15,000 engine. Luckily, the dealership that I bought the car for had advocated for me. I store this car in the winter, just as you do with the Z, probably 5-6 months at a time, that it's just in a garage or in a place where it's not getting a lot of snow or elements. And when I take it out, if it just had a fresh oil change or not too recently before I had stored it, I'm not exactly looking to go out and get a fresh oil change as soon as I take the car out. I'll run it throughout its storage time.
Because there's not many miles on that oil yet. It's just more time, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
So at the time, this was probably about May, early June, I had taken the vehicle out. I wasn't super concerned about getting an oil change. I probably had, I mean, the car had 3,000 miles on it at the time. I had a good amount to go before it was due for one. And we're talking, I had, just gotten it from the dealership. I had maybe been driving it for a total of 6-7 months at that point anyways. Very low mileage. And Dodge had told me that because I didn't have an oil change within 6 months on the vehicle, that was supposedly grounds for not replacing an engine that very clearly had a manufacturer fail to it. Luckily, the dealership took care of me and explained, we live in Connecticut, that's kind of crap. They got the engine replaced at no cost to me, but you do have to be careful with stuff like that. Manufacturer issues are well known to this car when it comes to the engine. After looking at some forums, I think you and I had both done some group research at the time, and we had both seen that other people did in fact have very similar experience, low mileage Challengers and major component failures with the engine straight out of the factory.
So after 4 years, if you had to do it all over again, say you were getting the car, the same one or a different car, like would you do anything differently? Would you get different packages? Would you add anything to it? Get a different model of Challenger? Just kind of open-ended. Would you change anything?
I really don't think I'd change much of anything. When it comes to the packages I bought, I had optioned up a 38K MSRP all the way up to 56 grand with tax. And I don't feel like there was really anything extra that I would have needed. I know one of the packages that I opted out of at the time was like the driver assistance package, stuff that shows up on the side mirrors to let you know about, stuff coming up on your blind spot or whatever. And I just didn't feel like I needed that or was necessary. I mean, I'll save $3,000 by looking over my shoulder, So that I didn't feel like was necessary. And also, at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, Dodge has put out a lot of impressive vehicles and additions of the Challenger since I bought this car. They've really gotten into the wide body styles since I bought the car. I think they started that just about a year after I bought this one. And they started putting it on the TA models and the Hellcats and all that good stuff. I've never personally been a huge fan of the wide body look on this car. It's just a personal preference thing. I've never really been into it. I know it's big in like the drag community. It gives you that extra spacing to put bigger tires on it and everything. But I was just never all that into it, and I don't really like the look particularly. Also, the Hellcat is obviously a much better performing car, but when I look at the hood styling of this car, I can't get away from the shaker. So I really don't think I would have made a different decision. At this point, I've excelled as a driver and certainly gotten more comfortable, and I do feel like I could handle a Hellcat and would probably like to own one. However, I'd have a tough time parting with this car in particular in order to swap out to it. In an ideal world, I'd probably have one of each.
You already kind of alluded to the fact that you wouldn't replace it, but so if we just bridge across that into what would be this car's companion, like what would you want next in addition to the Challenger?
I absolutely love this car. I love the muscle car driving experience. I love being able to toss out the back end, you know, spin the tires. I think bringing this car to a drag race event would be very beneficial, very fun for me as a driver of this car to kind of understand and get into. Unfortunately, I just haven't had the sort of time to make that happen in recent years, but it's definitely something I've considered and would like to get into in the future. But I've noticed myself in terms of driving this car and what I'd like out of performance, I think I am much more accustomed to something in line of a sports car. I think something like a Corvette C8 would really suit my driving needs on a day-to-day basis better than this car. That being said, I appreciate what this car is and what it can do so much that, as I've stated before, I'd have a really tough time getting rid of it.
Have you modified the car at all? And if you haven't, is there anything that you would want to do to it?
To the watchers of your review video, much to their disbelief, I have actually not modified this car in the slightest. It is bone stock from the day
You haven't done anything to the exhaust? Crazy.
I have not. I would like to modify the exhaust. I had talked with you previously about perhaps getting like a Borla attack system. Borla is one of the few manufacturers that I've seen that's able to keep the tone of the Challenger while amplifying the sound at the same time. A lot of the other systems I've seen amplify sound but really lose the tone as a trade-off. So I still would like to do that in the future, but it's just something that I haven't put a ton of time or energy into for buying and modifying car parts. But really beyond that, I don't think there's too much I'd really want to do with this car other than a new exhaust system and maybe a tune that kind of fits that system a little bit better. But beyond that, I don't really have any extreme plans for it. You and I had talked previously about perhaps at some point dropping a supercharger on this car. From the research that I've done, there's a few individuals with a 392 shaker that have dropped a couple superchargers in it and have had some success. The most noteworthy success I've seen is the individuals who bought a Ken Bell supercharger. That supercharger in particular seems to pair best with this vehicle.
Yeah, the 392s just don't take well to boost, I don't think. And even when people are supercharging them, it seems like they're keeping the level of boost like to a minimum to not just break it open. It's not built for it, no. You know? So if that's your goal going into owning a 392, you might just want to save your money and get a Hellcat.
Get a used Hellcat. Yeah. There's a reason why Dodge uses the 6.2 and supercharges it.
It's built for that specifically.
Right.
Yeah. Here's a question kind of from the peanut gallery of all the people who don't have Challengers. Mm-hmm. Does the weight bother you?
No, believe it or not, the weight is actually extremely fitting for the vehicle. I would say when you get in the Challenger and you throw the back end around and you do donuts or you take it from a roll or from a drag, that car is exceptionally well balanced with the weight that it has on it. It doesn't bother you. I would say the thing that's most bothersome and takes the most time for new Challenger owners to get used to is actually the spacing on the road. When you're sitting in the driver's seat, it feels extremely wide, and I would say it takes a good 2 or 3 months to get used to.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that. Just placing it on the road is more notable than like the weight at all. And I mean, you remember, we brought it to an autocross in Lime Rock and just tossed the thing around, and it was a blast. The weight, I mean, you feel that it's heavy, but it certainly doesn't impede your ability to have fun.
Right.
And that's what the car's all about, I think. Say somehow that you had control over like the future of the Challenger, or even like prior to this one, you had input with the manufacturer as to how they were going to do it. What aspects of the car would you have wanted them to change, if any?
Buddy, I don't know enough about cars to like properly answer that question.
Or anything that just like...
Because the only thing that I can think of saying that might even be somewhat relevant is the fact that like they really started diversifying, especially the last 3 years, like how many options you could get with the Challenger. You could get the TA, you could get the Super B, you could get the wide body, you get the wide body TA, you get the wide body Super B,
have
you
seen
get the
it's
Hellcat.
Getting worse now?
Yeah.
Like this final run, they've already posted like 3 or 4 different models.
Right.
And it's like, what's the difference between them?
That's what I'm saying. I think really they've just diversified so much to the fact where they're not getting as many sales. They're talking about discontinuing the current V8 model. They want to move forward with their electric design, which is starting to get more popular, but I don't think popular enough to feed them a ton of sales. I mean, they really make their money on making the V6 rentals. I think they need to reduce the amount of options they have, bump up their sales, and maybe combine the good ideas they had between the Super B, the TA, the wide body setup, and maybe reduce that into a couple different models rather than having 6 or 7 versions of the same car.
And make each one distinct.
Right.
Like, I remember when you were ordering this car, the difference between, okay, it's a 392 Scat Pack Shaker, but then there's the 392 TA, and it's like, it becomes so confusing because, like, oh, well, you could get the TA suspension on this, or did it already have the TA suspension? And obviously, I mean, I'm not advocating for not giving people choice when it comes to ordering their cars, but I think that there's kind of paralysis by analysis. Like, if you give people too much choice, they're just not going to buy it, or they're going to come to a worse conclusion than if the manufacturer... Oh, that was good. Then if the manufacturer just gave it a little more thought beforehand and gave people packages that made sense, versus leaving it so open-ended that people are just not really having any idea as to how to option their cars.
I think their analysis of the market for those that had an appreciation and want for muscle cars was broader than what they were hoping. So they put out a lot of options, a lot of models that they would have expected those with a true interest and passion in the muscle cars were going to buy. But the reality is,
everybody bought Hellcats.
yeah, everybody either bought Hellcats, or those who were interested would much rather just keep it simple.
Yeah. From Travis T. You are so right in how it's not right for everyone, and most people won't even respect it and think they can drive it like a Porsche 911. And the car will keep them safe. Nah, my friend. American flag muscle car is a straight line car, and anything beyond that is the skill of the patriot inside it.
What the f?
So the real question at the end of the day is, Daniel, Travis T and Jake L want to know, are you a skilled patriot?
I guess by their definition I am, if I'm capable of driving this car. But the reality is that it's just not that hard to drive this car. The Dodge made it that way for a reason, probably to pump up their sales.
God bless America.
Sure.
And God bless skilled patriots.
Yep.
I want to turn that into a t-shirt. Who wants a skilled patriot t-shirt?
This is just big Challenger
I'm thinking
headlights.
a Challenger, sideways, maybe a stencil of it, smoke billowing out the back, skilled patriot in a cool font.
You could also just use the still frame from your most viewed video.
Oh, and which video is that, Dan?
It's the Challenger 392 review. Like and subscribe, Buzzy the Blue.
It may not be perfect for you or me, but that's okay. It will be for someone. Let's just actually wrap.
Well, thanks for tuning in, guys.
All right, so I know that this was something a bit different, and I'm hoping that you enjoyed it. I might do this in the future if anybody watches it, and might even include something kind of similar to this in future reviews even. I think that it's kind of valuable to get insight from people who go for more than just like a 20-30 minute drive like I do and give you their thoughts. These are people that actually own the vehicles and can give you their thoughts on it instead. So thanks for watching, and tune in next time. Thanks. Little wave, I like it. That's good.
I think I can feel the eyes burning into the side of my skull. Like that, you seen that Family Guy skit with Conan where it's like, this is my time. Don't ever fucking talk to me during my time.